Brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that shares your values. More information is available at CharityMobile.com.
The modern world has turned its back on the faith. Unless you attend Mass exclusively at a thriving traditional parish, you have no doubt seen Mass attendance slowly dwindling over the years. You've probably noticed more funerals announced at your parish than weddings, baptisms, and RCIA enrollment combined. Worse, starting in 2020, the decline in Mass attendance increased exponentially, to such an extent that many normal Catholics, not tuned into the crisis in the church, began asking some pretty tough questions about the state of things in the church, about why their parishes were suddenly empty. In the past year specifically, things have gotten worse, with the secular authorities sensing that now is the perfect time to marginalize the church completely through direct action meant to silence the church's opposition to the various evils the secular rulers push on the world. A recent bill passed by Congress will harm the church and various faith communities in America, and various priests came out to celebrate that bill's passage. What should the role of priests be in times of open persecutions like this? You'd think it would be to rally the faithful in defense of the faith, to prepare them for the persecution, and to help them emulate the ancient martyrs or the martyrs of the Protestant revolt. But no, these priests are on the side of the external enemies of the church. They are the wolves in sheep's clothing. They are the enemy within. And the persecution of the church is ramping up at a time when she is at her weakest due to self-inflicted incompetence and heresy. Let's talk about the various very real manifestations of the apostasy that was warned about in sacred scripture, manifesting just openly in our time. But first, I wanted to thank the patrons and channel members for their continued support of Return to Tradition. Even in these weird times, your help has been greatly appreciated. It really has been. If you have been wanting to help keep these messages coming, there are links in the description box to Subscribestar, which is a Patreon alternative that does respect your speech and speech rights, as well as to Patreon and a few other options, including that join button prominently displayed below the screen. Thanks, and on to our story. The apostasy in our time is, in fact, very real, and it's being made manifest through blasphemy, sacrilege, and even priests signaling that their faith lies in not Christ and Him crucified and risen from the dead, but in politics. No faith in the church, apparently, for them. From Alatea, we get this heartbreaking story. Headline: Belgians increasingly asked to be unbaptized. Here's all the information you need about getting unbaptized if you found this video by trying to find out how to have your baptism removed. You cannot be unbaptized. Baptism leaves an indelible, meaning permanent mark on your soul. It's there forever, and it cannot be removed. Sorry to have to tell anyone searching for a way to have Christ's grace and mark removed from their soul, but that's just not how it works. But in our time, people have been asking for their baptisms to be removed and others to have their records of their baptisms hidden. We saw this in America recently with a group of self-described servants of Satan offering an unbaptism ceremony, complete with hilariously bad Latin certificates telling people that they were now no longer baptized and they could, do as thou wilt, which is Satan's motto. Now we see it in Europe. In the article, quote, a new annual report published on November 30th has noted a decline in the faithful of Belgium, as more Catholics are asking to be removed from baptism registries. The numbers show a nearly 300% increase in, quote, debaptism since 2019. The numbers provided by The Pillar show 5,237 requests for changes to baptismal records in 2021, which is nearly 3 times the 1,800 requests at 2019. It should be noted that the Catholic Church does not recognize or allow debaptism. A Catholic baptism is a sacrament, an irreversible act that the Catechism of the Catholic Church regards as conveying an indelible spiritual mark that identifies one as belonging to Christ. Of course, while you cannot undo a baptism, you can lapse in your faith and leave a parish. Requests that have been made, however, are noted in the baptismal registers. The report also contains some figures that show a sharp decline in Mass attendance. Fewer than 17,000 attended Mass on an average Sunday in 2021, which is down from over 241,000 in 2019. Meanwhile, Christmas Mass attendance was recorded at just over 347,000 in 2021. This is down from over 551,000 in 2019. It was estimated that only 2.5% of Belgians' 6.7 million Catholics attend Mass in 2021. Similar declines were also seen in the other sacraments as well. First Communion, confirmations, Catholic weddings, and funerals were all found to be in decline in 2021 compared to 2019. The report did note, however, that the figures from 2021 could be anomalous due to the affliction of 2020 and 2021. While the report suggested that the recorded decline in Catholic practices in Belgium could be due to the Church's stance on the James Martin parody of the nuptial sacrament, it could not pinpoint exactly why so many Belgians are leaving. The study noted that issue between the Church and the James Martin crowd have been receiving a lot of national attention in the media, end quote. Okay, so this is at least partially due to a media campaign and propaganda being fed to people in the education system. The propaganda is fed to them from the time that they're in the equivalent of kindergarten or preschool. But this is due in a very real way to both the Church not resisting Caesar's decrees in 2020 to close parishes due to the nonsense going on at that time, and allowing the Mass to be deemed not essential by the government, as well as to the Church allying itself overtly with the state, promoting its various evil programs. These statistics are at the heart of why the Church in Germany is on the verge of formal schism. By their own admission, they have the same problem and same low Mass attendance. They want to change the Church's teaching on those issues, the article listed there that I sort of dodged around. It's worth noting that Aletheia is a liberal, hypermodernist Catholic news source and is generally on the side of the German bishops in their synod and their broader synod on synodality, though they did cite a pretty good news source there, the Pillar. It's also worth noting here that we're talking about Belgium, where the Flemish bishops created a whole Mass setting for the blessing of secular James Martin pairings at the new Mass, despite the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith previously stating that, well, this can't be done, that the Church cannot bless evil things. Reportedly, Francis endorsed this blessing when he met with the Flemish bishops recently. These actions are being taken by the bishops partially because they don't believe the faith's warnings against the sins we're obliquely talking about here, sins that the Bible describes as crying out to heaven for vengeance. They do it also because they're desperately trying to stop the apostasy that has all but swallowed the Church in Germany. Now, that having been said, America is not in any better place, really. We have more people going to Mass. That's not saying much. We've been in the process of doing the next best thing to unbaptizing ourselves collectively for several years now. In the past decade, America has led the way by legalizing the James Martin parody of marriage, which opened the floodgates. Most recently, Congress passed a law that will punish organizations who refuse to go along with that parody of the nuptial sacrament for no protections with their professed faith. To make matters worse, a priest is going along with this, and he's celebrating it. He's the cheerleader for this. And this is not James Martin we're talking about. Now, this priest we're talking about spends entirely too much time on Twitter and has a history of basically aligning himself with the political party in America that currently occupies the White House, and even calls people wicked names who try to fight against the rising tide of godlessness in the culture that manifests itself most nakedly in the Moloch ritual. The priest is obsessed with issues of the flesh, not the traditionally sinful issues that the Church tackles, but those issues the secular world is focused on. He has fully accepted the secular world's framing of the issues of race and of the flesh, and demands that you accept that political party's declarations on those issues as a matter of the Catholic faith, that you are a sinner if you don't agree with their framing of these issues. That priest is Father Bruce Wilkinson, a priest from Atlanta who cheered when that political party that he worships passed their decrees that will allow for the persecution of the faithful. ComplicitClergy.com has a write-up on this priest, and I'll spare you most of the details about him, other than to say that when it comes to priests like this, they drive people away from the Church, typically into the waiting arms of Protestant groups that at least have a veneer of moral orthodoxy about them. Many people who leave the Catholic faith go to those places because they're looking for, well, the faith, and they're not finding it in Catholic churches. It's priests like this doing this. They cause scandal by taking positions contrary to the teachings of the Church. For a Catholic to endorse a bill that will be used to persecute the Church is evil. To endorse the James Martin parody of the nuptial sacrament is blatant heresy, and yet across the entire West, we see the Church is at this time reeling from these false priests in her ranks who use their positions of authority to pass the poisonous errors of modernism and secularism as the teachings of the Church. This leads to internal conflict in the Church that leads directly to people being driven away from the faith and from the Church, either into the open arms of secularism or into the open arms of schismatic heretical groups. Because priests like this lead the faithful to being forced to witness to the truth and saying things that conflict with that propaganda I mentioned earlier, propaganda taught in the state's education programs, by the way, get your kids out of them, please. People from a young age are programmed by the state to accept positions contrary to the faith, which is why so many Catholics and other Christians educate their children themselves at home or in neighborhood groups. And they won't even submit their children to being educated by a Catholic school because many of those schools are functionally secular in their orientation, and they are run by priests like Father Bruce Wilkinson, who damage the souls in their care by becoming mouthpieces for the secular authorities, mouthpieces for their false gospel. That is what they end up promoting. But are you surprised that people are walking away from the faith in our times? Are you surprised that wicked, faithless priests are part of the reason that they leave? Maybe the driving force for why they leave. Does Rome's refusal to preach the authentic gospel make matters worse? Let me know in the comments what you thought of all this. Please like and subscribe if you haven't. It really does help, as does sharing this on social media. That helps a lot as well. And once again, thanks to the patrons and channel members for their support of Return to Tradition. It is greatly appreciated. And I hope this Advent and this run-up to Advent to Christmas that we've all been experiencing has been very fruitful for you lately, and that you managed to get to Mass a few extra times, that you've gone to confession at least once during Advent. Should be going every other week. But that you've gone to confession, and that you've gone to Mass, and that you've managed to go on holy days of obligation, like the one today. So please, have a blessed Feast of the Immaculate Conception, and as always, pray for the Church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.